Welcome to our talk today. So I'm Michelle Gross, President of Spectrum Science Communication. ChatGPT has been available for, to the general public for just under 3 years, but yet it's really significantly changing the way we're getting information. So we're quickly moving away from traditional searches where you get websites served up to you to receiving more information that's more easy to understand, more direct, a one answer from our AI models. And what we know is that Google's expected to lose search activity to the AI models by about 60%. So that's a significant change, and it's happening even faster in healthcare. People are looking for information about healthcare topics that is, easy to understand. It's a direct answer. They don't want to have to go searching through different websites to figure out, what their disease symptoms are, or what treatments are out there. So healthcare is even more drastically and more quickly changing, and so it's more important than ever that we have the story around our brands, that people are getting accurate information and the right story about the brands. So right now, there's a big risk for people to get misinformation. And so, what we're going to be talking about today is a case study that's focused on NewAmsterdam. So I'm going to introduce Bob in a minute. He's going to be sharing his experiences around how they're looking at AI search and how it's impacting the narrative around their brand, and some things that they have been doing and practical guidance around how to start looking at these models to make sure that the right information is getting out there into these models about your brand. So we'll do introductions. I have here Michelle Strier. She is the Chief Strategy Officer at Spectrum. We have Bob Rambo. He is the EVP of Marketing at NewAmsterdam Pharma. And then we have Bryan Blatstein. He's the head of Integrated Media at Spectrum as well. So these are our panelists today. So we are going to start, Bob, with a question for you. So can you share when you first realized it was necessary to review what AI tools were presenting about cholesterol, your medication, and NewAmsterdam?
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much for having me here. Thank you to the audience for attending today. So we are a bit of a case study, and it's an interesting case study. So at NewAmsterdam Pharma, we're a startup biotech. We are now over 100 people, and we are resurrecting a disease class or therapeutic class that's about 2 decades old. And so it's the cholesterol ester transfer protein, or CETP inhibitor. They were all the rage, again, beginning of 2000s. Pfizer had one, Merck had one, Roche and Lilly all had CETP inhibitors. Lots of press, lots of excitement, and they were going to be the next breakthrough in cardiovascular risk management, because they lower LDL, but they raise HDL, or good cholesterol. Turns out there were a number of failures, and they were multifactorial. The products themselves, Pfizer's product had an issue with raising blood pressure. Merck's product actually did work quite well, but it accumulated in fat tissue, was not an approvable drug. And I was at Merck at the time, so I could vouch for that. The other 2 compounds were studied for HDL raising, but not LDL lowering, eventually failed in their cardiovascular outcomes trials. So now fast forward 2 decades, we are now looking at CETP inhibition for LDL lowering, just like statins, PCSK9s, bempedoic acid, other products. And we know LDL lowering works. Additionally, we've generated quite a bit of phase 3 data that shows the tolerability is about equal to placebo. So we have good news, lots of good news. So as you can imagine, what is AI saying about that, right? Are they talking about all the new data, the new drug, the new direction we're taking the class in, or are they pulling from older products? So that's the big question right now.
I think this is like a perfect question for communicators, right? When we start to talk about how to optimize for these generative engines, because what are communicators great at? We're great at shifting narratives. And what's happening now with these generative engines is where you used to be able to rely on a person to look at a bunch of links and sift through it and know what was old and what was new and what was accurate and what was inaccurate. Now we're being served like this single source of truth through the generative engines. And as communicators, we better be sure that what is actually being served to our audiences is actual truth.
No, I would agree with that. Just to further Strier's point, I've been doing this for 25 years now, and I think the other shoe drop for me really was when I realized that perception in healthcare, it's kind of like a clinical trial, right? You could spend years and millions, testing a drug's safety and efficacy. But if the court of public opinion, which is largely shaped by generative engines these days, if they say otherwise, then all that science could be for naught. And we're kind of seeing a variation, I think, of that play out in Florida with the rollback of the vaccine mandates. I don't have to tell any communicator here that we're in an infodemic, right? It's just all the information is coming at you fast and furiously. But I do want to give a shout out to the power of earned media when it comes to GEO. I mean, earned media has obviously always been a thing. It kind of was almost sunsetted, I feel like, in the rise of social media. But now today, I think that when you have a vetted article by, like a Fierce, speaking of Fierce, or a Stat, or an MIT Tech Review, or a Reuters, that basically says that there is an institution that is reputable, that is validating your science or your drug. And I feel like for GEO, when placed strategically, it literally can't be beat.
So we're moving, right, from this time of being able to just search and get a lot of different responses to getting one answer. And that's kind of what is forming today's truth. There's a lot less fact checking because people are just trusting the source of AI. And so as communicators, we really need to stay alert because what AI says can quickly, as Brian's saying, shape how the public thinks about our brands. So I'm going to ask the panel, why does this shift make our role as communicators even more important, and why is it even more risky than it has been in the past? And Bob, let's start with you again.
Yeah, so I set up the case study. So the background, right, is there's baggage within this class, right? And so intuitively, and Spectrum is a strategic agency for us, and so they're a PR agency, and so we said, what's AI say? Tell me what AI is saying about my baby, especially given the past history of the class. And surprisingly, it called my baby ugly. And it was so why? Why was it calling the baby ugly, right? It was pulling from this older data that, again, like I said, almost, certainly more than a decade old, perhaps 2 decades ago. Like I said, there were problems within just the hypothesis, right, of what we were trying to do here. We changed it, we flipped it. And now we've conducted 3 phase 3 clinical studies in over 3,000 patients. And the data are robust, right? We just filed in Europe. We're talking to the FDA now. And so we feel that we have a really good story to tell. But as you know, when AI, it tells the story for you. In other words, when you use a search engine, and if you were to Google CETP inhibition, you would have peer-reviewed articles, right? You may have our .com show up, but you can choose what you're going to want to read, right? Here I have AI generating 3-4 paragraphs, but multiple paragraphs that is now my truth. And it's not the truth, quite frankly. And so that's the problem.
I think the thing to think about when you think about why that is, right, is that the more information has proliferated online, the more these LLMs recognize it as a pattern, right? And what they're looking for is patterns. And so, earlier data, like an issue that existed with the class, or, earlier phase data that maybe you've moved away from a strategy, will look like a pattern to the LLM, and it will serve it up. And that older, more proliferated information is going to be stickier and be served up more often. So you really need to be thinking through a proactive strategy around shaping that narrative and being very clear on what is being served up and why, and what those kind of strategic questions you have to kind of get ahead of are.
And, I'll just add to what Strier said. And to answer your question too, MG, it's risky, I feel like, because as communicators,
we've been doing one thing one way for a really long time. And, we also, I can speak for myself and I can speak for some of the people out here as well, we like control. We like to control the narrative. We like everything tightly controlled. With AI and these, big bad robots, there's a lack of control, right? So I think that's why it's incredibly risky. We have to shift our mindset a little bit to understand, we could help it along, we could help the reputation along, but there's still going to be an element of non-controlling this thing.
Right. And so we understood and knew that a traditional SEO strategy wasn't going to be the answer for this problem, right? So Spectrum and NewAmsterdam worked together to come up with a different approach. And so, Michelle, do you want to tell us about the GEO, how we approach the GEO strategy?
I mean, I'll give sort of a broad look at GEO is not wholesale different than SEO, right? It's essentially you're just optimizing now for a different type of search. And you never are going to walk away from your SEO efforts. It's just sort of adding kind of GEO into the mix and understanding how these LLMs look for and crawl information on your own sites and in other places. And so ultimately the strategy is to look at retiring old content, which actually I think is a really new concept for many of us as communicators, this notion of more is not always more. If you're giving access to the old information and not pointing the LLM to what is the new information, then you're just contributing ultimately to the issue. So retiring old content where possible, creating new content that is as usable and crawlable by those LLMs as possible, seeding stories in credible outlets to make sure that the narrative is coming from multiple authoritative sources. And just in general, kind of making sure that when you think about the brand, you're thinking about like sort of I'm going to say data hygiene kind of around the brand narrative, right? And so, Brian, I think you want to talk a little bit about like some of the more detailed, what are we now doing?
No, absolutely. The way things are written matters, and I feel like now they matter more than ever. We know that the LLMs, like that human-centrist language. It's again, I'm no stranger to being rushed and having to get this out the door and that out the door. But I think what I'm trying to do, and I'm having my team do, is really be incredibly thoughtful about how things are written, so they are picked up in the appropriate way by these LLMs. Long-form journalism, podcasts are always great for that kind of stuff. And also, I know I spoke earlier about the power of earned media, which I stand by, but I'm also not a believer in just waiting for those moments where you can go out to the media. Owned content is really, really key. And again, it's, the way it's written is going to either make it or break it. So, one of the things we do at Spectrum is that, we, rather than write it in-house, we'll bring in, ex-journalists and ex-writers to kind of write some of this, what otherwise would be mundane content, because we know this is the stuff that kind of gets picked up by the robots.
And there's so you want to use natural language, that's attractive. You want to use FAQs. We've been talking about FAQs just for search for a long time. It's more important than ever.
Transcripts.
Transcripts. We were talking about anything that we could, for the OB example in particular, anything that we can do that tells that whole story from beginning to end, that says this part of the story is the old story and this part of the story is the new story. And to house that somewhere where it's going to be crawlable and tagged appropriately so that the LLM can find it and understand, okay, now it knows, okay, this is old and this is new. We're talking about even if you publish something like a white paper, for instance, that tells that story in a credible outlet that may live behind a firewall, and therefore it's not going to actually make it into the narrative that the LLM serves up. So part of what you might want to do is find a place to house that content in a way that's tagged so that the LLM can crawl it and know it's there, even if your general audience that would come to your website, for instance, doesn't see it.
Bob, why don't you bring us back to the case study and help us understand what are you looking to achieve as you execute
and this is fascinating, by the way, right? And certainly new, especially as a business owner. It's new. And within the marketing world, especially the PR world, right? What do? We storytell, right? We're professional storytellers. But we have to tell a story that's going to resonate well enough to be picked up, right? And hopefully AI is telling the same story that we choose to tell, and we're very particular how we develop the narrative. You know, we develop in the PR world, we develop our narrative, we develop our FAQ, right? When we do our pitches, all the pitches are telling the story we want to do, or tell rather. IR, same thing, right? We carefully craft our press releases, right? To tell our story from a publications perspective, the same. We're not on the market yet, but we do have disease state awareness. And again, we're consistently working hard to tell the story. And then finally pubs, right, from a medical affairs standpoint. But you look across this entire enterprise of corporate communications, right, that don't necessarily fall within PR. This has to be an enterprise effort to think about how do we optimize the not only tell the story, but tell the story in a way that's optimized for search, right, and for GEO. And we normally don't do that, right? We optimize our website. Our website's certainly SEO, right? But what about our publications? Our publications are not, right? They're not optimized for GEO. I know our press releases aren't. So how do we get there? And that's, we're trying to get our head around that. And it's a bit daunting, and it's new, right? There's no playbook for this, and that's the problem.
Right. So, and can you tell us a little bit about where you are in the project right now?
Yeah, so we're still learning. Quite frankly, we're analyzing the results that Spectrum has generated for us, and now we're kicking the tires. But where we are right now is I'm in the process of trying to gather, really, like I said, across the company to get everyone involved who touches any communication that could be picked up by AI and help to tell that story. We talked about retiring old content. Yeah, well, one of the things we did find was AI was using more phase 2 than phase 3, even though our phase 3 data are published and been presented at scientific congresses. It's picking up phase 2 data, right? And some of the referencing was wrong. So how do we fix that? What can we do internally? So we have to get everyone, literally it's going to be a player. Medical affairs, like I said, IR, certainly marketing, PR, everyone, and then our CEO, for example, right? You know, he gets lots and lots of interviews, right? And our chief science officer, he does podcasts once in a while. But everything has to tell the same story, right? So it's gathering the troops and coming up with not only PR solutions, but enterprise solutions.
It's really about connecting those dots.
Right.
And so, Michelle, we're going to be measuring and monitoring the progress. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we have to know is it's an iterative process. It's not going to happen overnight. The LLMs get trained on a kind of frozen data set that contains whatever it contains. And so we have to understand that it's going to be kind of an ongoing process that's going to involve kind of rigorous sort of manual monitoring, using tools to monitor, understand that make sure we're not just looking at the questions that we are thinking about, but really looking at the questions that people are searching for and seeing what kind of answers are turning up for those. And then continually sort of just like any other optimization, like turn up or turn down different parts of the story through the content and through the media that we're placing, et cetera, to make sure that the story is what we need it to be. And then don't forget, these algorithms are constantly being updated. So, you know, it's the kind of thing that it's not going to be a one and a done, like sometimes people mistakenly treat SEO that way. I mean, I think that SEO also should be an ongoing effort, but I think like GEO even more so, it's going to be an ongoing process that we need to think about and budget for and keep top of mind all the time.
If I could just underscore something that Michelle said, that Strier said. You know, this doesn't happen overnight. You know, it's brand new. You know, I think we're doing it, you know, fairly well for where we are, but we still have a lot to figure out. But the one thing, and this is where a partner like Bob and NewAmsterdam comes in, you know, if we are able to work together to put that scaffolding around the company's reputation with all the things that everybody here mentioned, that's going to help us continue to measure and measure properly in the future.
Yeah, and can I just
Yeah,
do
go
a
ahead.
double click on Earn too?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the place that really gets me nervous, right? Because,
Me too.
you know, we're always nervous about what the reporter's going to write, right? But now we have the potential where not only it hits you once, right, but becomes now part of your narrative.
That's right.
That these engines can draw from,
Yeah,
right?
Totally. that's a fantastic point, and I think, listen, it's always been incredibly important to be very, very thoughtful with, which particular outlet will get which story, and even more so, which particular reporter at which outlet gets which story. And I think, I like to think that we've always been thoughtful, but now is the time, to your point, Bob, where it's like, that is going to be everything. I mean, if I truly believe that earned media is going to tell your story in the best possible way through, these generative engines, then it's almost like, it's like gambling, man. If I'm going to put everything on red, it better come up red. You know what I mean? So,
well,
that's
it's like
there.
what we were talking about the other day. It becomes even more important to make sure that your spokespeople
That's right.
are incredibly well trained, that they're delivering
yeah.
the message that you want to hear come out
That's right.
as part of this kind of overarching strategy to shape the narrative.
That's right.
And so I'm sure Bob's not alone in the challenges that he and New Amsterdam are having. So if you each could share your thoughts on why should each communicator here be thinking about GEO as they're thinking about their communications activities for their company.
All right, so everyone's looking at me, I guess.
Go ahead.
So it's a new paradigm. I mean, quite frankly, it's a new paradigm. We like I said, we know how to SEO our website, right? And but we don't know how to GEO every communication that's going out. We certainly don't. And like I said, imagine sitting down medical affairs and explaining this to them. This is not something that's going to resonate well with them, right? Or IR. I mean, we write our press releases, but our head of IR is not thinking GEO, right? So it's going to be a lift, and it's a paradigm shift. And like I said, I think we're at the beginning of this. Thank God we identified it, right? But now it's generating solutions, right? And how do I control the narrative that I can't control? Right.
I almost think too, Bob, there's almost like speaking to
Right.
communicators here, there needs to be like a mind shift. I mean, we're storytellers, as you said earlier. Oh, is my mic not on?
Yes.
Can you all hear me? There we go.
Okay.
All right. We figure ourselves as storytellers, which we are, but I also feel, and we were talking about this just the other week, I feel like with GEO now, we're now portfolio reputation managers. I mean, that's going to be the thing moving forward. We really have to kind of make sure that we always are thinking about, GEO and how we're telling them, and how a company like New Amsterdam is connecting the dots via these LLMs. And that's kind of the new reality, because, I feel like communicators, to answer your question, MG, should be thinking about this, because this is it. Like, it's only going to get more sophisticated from this second on. It's going to be more sophisticated. It's not going the other way. So it's going to be pretty key that we all start thinking in a slightly different way with this stuff.
And I will say it shouldn't be all so daunting, right? There's opportunity in this as well, right? To shape a much more understandable story in the generative engines that you're using. Even on Google, you get your Google search terms, but at the top now you get your AI answer. I saw a stat the other week that said 87 or so, I think I'm getting it right, percent of the sources that answer is pulled from are from outside the top 10 links that came up in your Google search. So if you're building authoritative, credible content on your own channels and pursuing a strategy that's making sure that other credible sources are supporting that same story, you can insert yourself into that answer that's kind of above the fold on the page and sort of get ahead of the game too. So there's a lot of work to do, but it gives us an opportunity to really shape the narratives that we're working through all of our more traditional channels to shape.
Yeah, and one of the things that has kind of become clear to us as we've had these conversations is really these AI models are almost becoming like the ultimate influencer. Think about it as like the influencer, and what are those, the content and the information we need to feed that influencer so that it tells our story. So I know we've covered a lot today, everything from the risks of outdated information on AI and the tactics that allow us to address those risks. So to close us out, if you could each give us one piece of advice to everyone sitting here as they're preparing to think about the new era of AI and how it's impacting communications, what would that be? Bob, why don't we start with you again?
Yeah, I mean, my bit of advice is ask the question. It's really easy to do, right? Go on your AI platforms and ask the right questions. What's it saying about my product? What's it saying about my MOA? What's it saying about my company? What's it saying about my clinical trials? Right? And document that and then put a plan together, because if we could do it right, like you said, imagine if AI is giving the exact narrative that you would like it to do. Think about how influential that is and how key to your brand that is.
Yeah, I mean, my advice would be don't wait. We heard earlier this morning, I feel like the first panel, there was like a question that was in and around this topic, and everybody was not quite sure what they were supposed to be doing. It's been about 1,000 days since ChatGPT entered our lives. Believe it or not, only that many. And like, if you're waiting around to be an expert, to feel like you can take this information to your CEO and start talking about why you need to allocate budget toward this, you're making a mistake by waiting. Just get in there and don't wait for expertise. Get in there and start doing it.
I would say, the importance of managing that perception, and then targeting those amplifiers that I spoke about, and finally telling that value story in a very, very human way. Also want to leave you all with this, because I was born and raised here, and I think I speak for Bob. Go Birds.
So it's clear how we communicate will define our success in navigating this evolving landscape. Let's make sure we're having these conversations within our own organization so we can continue shaping meaningful narratives about our brands. And so with that, we'll close our session, but open it up to any questions from the group.
Is there someone?
I don't know if there's someone with a mic.
Try, yeah.
So you mentioned trying to rally the troops and multiple stakeholders. What do you plan to tell people like medical affairs and your investor group as like a first or a second step? Like, what are you asking them to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we are doing is sharing the results, because it's an awareness, right? But like I said, there's not a cookbook. So what we have done as a company is hired a head of AI. Now that head of AI is multifactorial, right? It's about, he will be leading the creation of productivity tools, also AI capabilities internal, right? But now he's also going to now have an opportunity to help us externally, right? So I think that's a good first step. Secondly, again, we're going to generate awareness, and so we have working groups that we're starting to form. It's about sharing the data. And then third, it's obviously working with people to partner, right, and putting that action plan into place.
And we're not waiting, right? Like, we're going to get going
Yes.
while that's happening, right? Again, not to say like, let's not have 5 working groups and get nothing done.
We have 45 more seconds.
There's another question over there.
Okay.
So you said that AI called your baby ugly. Were you able to fix it? Is your baby still ugly, or are you able to?
I think it's still ugly. We have work to do.
Yeah.
We definitely have some work to do. But I guess it's a homework assignment, right? Because we should report back at some point to see, how much progress have we been able to make. But we're still at the infancy stage, right? But you have to start somewhere. And AI is new, right? And so we'll figure it out.
One last quick one. I was wondering how you struck a balance between, we're moving away from topics and keywords into questions, right? How did you balance questions you wanted the consumers to ask versus questions the consumers were asking?
Yeah, I'll take this. And I just want to say, I will say, so this is a newish project that we're working on, that we're highlighting today, but it does work, right? It takes a little time, but we do have examples of changing a narrative over time. So that just wanted to make sure you understood it. It could work. I think you need to do a mix, right? So if you don't have any budget and it's just you and you're trying to figure out, what's going on, ask some questions to the engines themselves, ask where they're pulling the information from, go check out those citations, see if the information is right. But what you really want to do is use a combination of your own organic searching and some of these tools that are just like the SEO tools that look at like what people actually are searching for, and you need to be looking at both, right? The other thing we've been talking about for other clients too that are, you know, have bigger portfolios of drugs, and is like you also can't boil the ocean, right? You need to think, what are the questions I really need to know the right answer is getting served up to? And so thinking about like strategically, what do I need to achieve, like everything else we do, right? Strategically, what do I need to achieve with GEO? And now how am I going to use both manual searching and ongoing, you know, potentially building agents who can keep doing that manual searching for you, and these tools to see what people are really searching for to kind of inform the strategy over time.
Okay. See, I think we are out of
We're
time.
negative
Yes.
one.
Negative
So
time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.